healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda. We're going to pick up this morning at the tail end of that account, again here in verse 14. For time's sake and for the sake of those of you still standing, we're only going to read 4 verses and I'll have you sit. But if we're able, let's all stand together for the reading of God's Word here as we begin reading in John chapter 5, verse 14. It says, "Afterward Jesus findeth him in the temple, and said unto him, Behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. And the man departed, and told the Jews that it was Jesus which had made him whole. And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus, and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. But Jesus answered them, My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he not only had broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God." You may be seated. So we open up here at the tail end of this account, finding that the Jews, the Pharisees, the religious authorities of Israel at that time were not at all thrilled for what Jesus had done. Now, last week as we looked at the pool of Bethesda, there were a few things that we tried to point out. Its name meaning the house of mercy or the house of grace. It was a pool of water which was divided into just a little bit north of the temple wall. Later reconstructions of Jerusalem would put it within the city limits, but at this time and throughout most of Jerusalem's history, it was a place that was just outside of the city walls by something called the sheep gate, where the sheep would come in, they would be brought into the city, into the temple to be sacrificed. There is a tradition that says that this pool was used to bathe the animals before they went into the town. There's not a lot of evidence either way to either corroborate it or dismiss it. That is just something that gets mentioned when this pool is mentioned, when it's looked at. And this pool also, for a very long time, had been dismissed as not existing. But it turns out that it had a temple built over the top of it by, I believe, the Byzantines, because they realized, hey, this is a pool where Jesus performed this miracle. They wanted to build a temple over it so they could worship him there. And eventually excavations led to the realization that this is in fact the same, or a pool that matches this exact description. Right? And you think about the pool, you wonder, well, how can a pool have 5 porches or 5 coverings? Think about it kind of like the Bible, right? You have a rectangle, it's got 4 sides, and then you have a split down the middle. And on one side you have a pool, on the other side you have a pool. So you have those 5 walls, or those 5 porches there. We find at the feast days that there were masses of people that would come to Jerusalem. Right? There weren't just observant Jews living in Jerusalem. They were living all over the area, all over Israel, and even outside of the borders of Israel. But as observant Jews, they were required to come to Jerusalem a few times a year for different feasts. We're not given the exact feast that is being spoken of here in John chapter 5. It more than likely wasn't Passover. Passover comes up, I believe, in chapter 6. Let me just double check that. Passover comes up later. We'll leave it at that. But this was a feast where a lot of Jews went to Jerusalem. Now, remembering that already this is a pool where when the water was stirred, people would be healed. Right? And what's human nature when something on us hurts or when we don't feel well? It's to do everything in our power to try and take that hurt away or to feel better. Right? I think last week I told you that when I get a head cold, I immediately start thinking about the times that I don't have a head cold and wondering how foolish I am to take those times for granted, as one nostril's on fire and the other I can't breathe out of. Right? I don't want to do anything at all to try and take that away, because this nostril hurts and this nostril's useless. I don't like it. Right? So if I had an opportunity, just touch a pool of water when it started moving and all of a sudden I feel better, well, hallelujah, I'm going to do that. Right? And human nature is that if you're not feeling well, if your toe hurts, that's the most important problem in the whole entire world. If you're sitting in the middle of traffic and you really need to pee, everybody else's day doesn't matter, right? It's no longer about, well, I wonder where all these people are going. You know, everybody's just trying to go about their days. Why are these fools in my way? Don't they understand? So we take pain, we take hurt, suffering, blindness, deafness, paralysis, lifelong illnesses. But when somebody has a little bit of a hurt, somebody's a little bit inconvenienced by what's going on in their day, other people's trials no longer matter nearly as much. So by human nature, we can, and by the testimony of this man who was healed, as Jesus asked if he wanted to be made whole, he told him, well, I'd like to, but nobody can get me down to the pool fast enough, right? Before I can get down there, someone else has already beat me to it. We can infer that more often than not, there's probably a stampede to the water's edge by people who could move, or people who could carry their sick child down to the water. Right? There's this desire to be healed, this desire to be fixed, and we know by human nature, when you need fixed, or when your child needs fixed, when your loved one has something wrong with them, nobody else's problems matter. We looked at last week how Jesus took mercy on this man who could do nothing for himself, who could not heal himself, he could not reach the pool by himself. He took mercy on this man and he healed him. He said, take up your bed and walk. We looked at the other occurrences where this pool is mentioned, or at least it seems to be this pool that is being mentioned. There are a couple of times in the Old Testament where it comes up, and both times we see that it is a place where the issues of man, the things that man could do nothing about, were met by the promise of God. Right? One of these occasions was as King Ahaz found out that the nation Syria was confederate with Israel up to the north, and they had their sights set on Jerusalem, they had their sights set on Judah, and they were going to do everything in their power, their confederated power, to destroy it. And Ahaz came out to the pool, and he spoke with Isaiah there, and Isaiah said, don't worry about it. Before this even becomes a problem, God's already got it taken care of. These two nations, they're going to be destroyed. And he used the nation of Assyria to do that. Right? And we kind of get those nations mixed up. Syria, Assyria, their names are so similar that we have a hard time differentiating. Just know Assyria was much bigger and meaner than even Syria was, who was renowned for their bigness and meanness, especially in comparison to Israel. Judah was facing a problem that they had no power of their own to fix. We see it happen again with Hezekiah as Assyria had now set its sights on Jerusalem, and they came to this place there by the temple, by the wall, by the sheep gate, and they told Jerusalem that, look, we've already started destroying your cities elsewhere in Judah. We've already destroyed Assyria. Syria. See, even I get them mixed up. We have already destroyed Syria, all these other nations. Their gods could do nothing for them. Your God can do nothing for you. And what does Hezekiah do? He brings this issue to the Lord and the problems of man. The insurmountable problem of man was met by the promise of God. Don't worry about it. He's going to hear a rumor. He's going to go back to his own nation, and when he's there, he's going to die. Right? That's what we looked at last week. Now, we use that as an introduction for this week because we find that with this healing, with this meeting of an insurmountable problem, and the grace and the mercy and the healing power of God, that Jesus got himself into some hot water with the Pharisees. In fact, it was this event, it was this point in time where the Pharisees, the religious leaders of Israel, stopped seeing Jesus as just a nuisance or just a commodity, something like a sideshow, right? Like the circus would come through town. You think, oh, that's interesting. They've got elephants, right? Something that they just want to stop by and see what all the hubbub's about. And now they've made him angry, or he's made them angry. Now they want to kill him. Now they want to persecute him. It's this event here. But in order for us to really understand why, we have to understand the mindset of the Pharisees. We have to understand the mindset of the Jews at this time. Why was it that the things that Jesus did in commanding this man to carry his bed, to leave the pool, why was it in saying that his Father works and so he works? Why were these things so abhorrent to the Jews that they wanted to kill him for it? Right? Because in our minds, we really don't have a frame of reference. Nobody's going to kill us if we go to work on a Saturday. Nobody's going to kill us if we say, well, our Father works, our Father does all these things, so we're going to do it. Right? Our Father is busy trying to save people by His Spirit, by His will and His grace and His mercy, so we are too. Right? We don't have really much of a frame of reference here. So let's look just a little bit at the Sabbath. Right? And this whole event reminds me of what God told Jonah. In Jonah 4:4, I read it for you here. It says, "Thus said the Lord, doest thou well to be angry?" As God had just allowed, help me out here, name of the capital of Assyria. Nineveh, thank you. Had just allowed Nineveh to repent. Jesus just healed a man. Are you right in being angry? Are you doing well in being so angry over this? Well, let's talk about the Sabbath for a minute. Exodus 16 is where we find the first of the commands of the Sabbath. This is where God consecrated this day to Israel every week is to be their day of rest, to be their Sabbath. Exodus 16, beginning in verse 23, it says, "And he said unto them, This is that which the Lord has said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that what you will seethe. And that which remains over, lay up for you to be kept until the morning." And they laid it up till the day. For today is the Sabbath unto the Lord. Today ye shall not find it in the field. 6 days ye shall gather it, but on the seventh, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. Now, before this had happened, or it was either right before this or right after this had happened, someone tried to gather double the manna before the Sabbath. They tried to gather more for tomorrow when they were still allowed to go out tomorrow and pick it, or to gather it, and it went bad. So God was telling them, there's one day where you can gather double where it's not going to go bad. Just like when you go out there, if you go out there on the Sabbath day, it's not going to be there. You're not going to find it. All right? 6 days, He would bless their labor for the day, and on the seventh, if they tried to do that, if they tried to labor in the same way they did those other 6, their labor would not be blessed. There's an important lesson there, isn't there? When we work as according to God has told us that we ought to work, when we do in accordance as what God told us we ought to do, He's going to bless us for it. But when we start trying to overachieve, for lack of a better term, when we forget that God, who has mercy on us today, is still going to have mercy on us tomorrow, we start trying to compensate for that, He's not going to bless us in that. Right? He's not going to bless us for what is ultimately a lack or a lapse in faith for tomorrow. We have today to worry about. We have what God has put right before us to do. Let's let tomorrow deal with tomorrow. And if God tells us, well, get ready because tomorrow you're going to need something else and you need to do it today, let's do that too. Right? But I digress. Exodus chapter 20, moving on a little bit. I have a couple references here I'll just read for you for time's sake. Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11 says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." You read that in 6 1,000-year days, God created everything. So we have a 1,000-year day to just rest. No, I'm being facetious. 6 days, God created everything. And then he rested. He looked on his labor. He said, I'm going to take a break. Right? And since then, I think it's fair to point out, God hasn't rested. He rested the seventh day, and then he's been busy ever since. But we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. Exodus 31, verse 12 through 17. Give you a second to turn there while I get a quick drink. Exodus 31, 12 through 17 reads, "And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath therefore," and pay attention to this, "for it is holy unto you. Every one that defiles it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed." We find here this commandment by God that this Sabbath was to be observed, it was to be kept sacred and holy, and anybody who violated it was to be put to death, was to be cut off from the nation of Israel. So we see that those crazy Pharisees at least had legal grounds in their eyes for wanting to put Jesus to death. He violated the Sabbath. This was something that, in accordance with the commandments of God, deserved death. Right? But what were they forgetting? You see, we find throughout the Scriptures, and we're going to read a couple of examples of things that were prohibited as work. But there was things that were considered to be work, were considered to be violations of the Sabbath. And there was a lot of other things that got added on. Things that were considered to be work, were prohibited as work, were things like kindling fire. In Exodus 35:3 we read this, "Ye shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations on the Sabbath day." God said, don't make fire. It's prohibited on the Sabbath day to do that. Right? It takes work, takes effort. You're looking to do more work, to do more things with that fire. Just don't do it. Gathering wood. In Numbers 15, verse 32 through 36, we read an account of this man who was gathering sticks on the Sabbath. And he was brought to Moses and to ultimately to God, and God said to Moses, stone him. He was gathering sticks, he was doing work. Stone him, put him to death. Then I switched my pages a little bit too quickly. Jeremiah 17, and let's turn over to this one. Let's turn over to Jeremiah 17. Here we find a prohibition on bearing burdens. We'll begin reading here in verse 19. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 19. It says, Thus saith the Lord unto me, Go and stand in the gate of the children of the people, whereby the kings of Judah come in, and by the which they go out, and in all the gates of Jerusalem, and say unto them, Hear ye the word of the Lord, ye kings of Judah, and all Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, that enter in by these gates. Thus saith the Lord, Take heed to yourselves, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem. Neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day. Neither do ye any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. But they obeyed not, neither inclined their ear, but made their necks stiff, that they might not hear, nor receive instruction. And it shall come to pass, if you shall diligently hearken unto me, saith the Lord, to bring in no burden through the gates of this city on the Sabbath day, but hallow the Sabbath day, to do no work therein. Then shall there enter in the gates of the city kings and princes sitting upon the throne of David, riding in chariots and on horses, they and their princes, the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And this city shall remain forever. And they shall come from the cities of Judah, and from the places about Jerusalem, and from the land of Benjamin, and from the plain, and from the mountains, and from the south, bringing burnt offerings and sacrifices and meat offerings and incense, bringing sacrifices of praise unto the house of the Lord. But if you will not hearken unto me, and hallow the Sabbath day, and not to bear a burden, even entering in at the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle a fire in the gates thereof, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched. We find that by this testimony of Jeremiah here, that there was a direct correlation between their willingness to obey and to observe the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, and the prosperity or the destruction of Jerusalem. God told Israel, if you observe the Sabbath, if you keep the Sabbath holy, this reminder of this covenant between me and you, I'll bless you. If you refuse, the gates are going to be burned down. Okay? So there is precedent here in the understanding of a Jew, in the mindset of the Pharisees of this day. They were protecting the prosperity of Jerusalem by protecting the Sabbath. That's why they were so up in arms anytime Jesus would do something that they perceived as violating the Sabbath. It's because there was a direct tie between how well they kept the Sabbath and how much mercy and prosperity God had towards them. Right? That was in the mindset of the Pharisees, in the mindset of the Jews. You keep the Sabbath holy. You make sure that it's something that you don't let anybody violate it. Because if you do this, I'll prosper you. If you don't do this, you're going to be destroyed. Okay? So, when we reference John chapter 5, we think maybe it's a little bit of an overreaction on the Pharisees' side. We have to remember that this is what was on their minds. It's teachings like this that they had been raised with from childhood. You observe these things. You do not violate the Sabbath day. You do not allow others to violate the Sabbath day. You make sure that these things are upheld and kept holy. One other reference, Amos chapter 8, tells us that conducting business was also forbidden on the Sabbath day, and this is much more by implication than direct commandment. But I read for you Amos chapter 8, verse 4 through 6. It says, "Hear this, O ye that swallow up the needy, even to make the poor in the land to fail, saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit, that we may buy the poor for silver, and the needy for a pair of shoes, yea, and sell the refuse of the wheat." So we find here Amos chapter 8. We went over this in our Wednesday night studies of Amos, but I declare it to you again, that I remind you of it, that this was in the middle of God confronting Israel with all their sin. And within this confrontation of Israel's sin, the things that they had been doing directly in the face of God, sinning in the face of God, these are all references to violations of specific commandments that we won't go into right now. We find that they were, as a part of these sins, they were looking for this time of the Sabbath to sell. Right? Giving us this implication that the Sabbath time, conducting this business in the Sabbath, was a violation of the Sabbath. That it was sinful for them to do these things. And we find that while there were these very direct prohibitions on certain things during the Sabbath, that the Jews, that the Pharisees took it a step above and beyond. They wanted to be careful, right? They wanted to make sure, because of everything that was riding on keeping the Sabbath holy, they wanted to make sure that nothing would be done, that nothing could be done that would be in violation of the Sabbath. And so they started to build a list of things that were barred, essentially, that you couldn't do on the Sabbath day. And interestingly enough, there are remnants of these things today. There's a certain quarter in, I believe, New York, a Jewish quarter in New York, that has infrastructure in place so that observant Jews don't have to do certain things like push an elevator button. I'll leave that for you to study on your own, but it's fascinating, some of the things that they have come up with. I'm just going to read a list for you. These aren't things, aside from maybe the first one, or first couple, aren't things that are just outright barred by God in the Scriptures. But these are things that were added onto or given as a definition of work, right? Things that you don't do on the Sabbath day. There's 39 of them, so I'm just going to read through them real quick. Carrying, burning, extinguishing, finishing, writing, erasing, cooking, washing, sewing, tearing, knotting, turn the page, untying, shaping, plowing, planting, reaping, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, selecting, sifting, grinding, kneading, combining, spinning, dyeing, chain stitching, warping, which is arranging threads in a loom, weaving, unraveling, building, demolishing, trapping, shearing, slaughtering, skinning, tanning, smoothing, and marking. That's a lot of things that all kind of relate to one another, but a lot of different things that you have to try and remember or think of during the Sabbath day. Well, is what I'm doing falling under this definition? Right? Is what I'm doing right now going to fall into what is defined as work and violate the Sabbath day? Essentially looking at God as this being or this man who has just his checklist of the do's and do nots. And he's watching each and every individual like a sports statistician does these people playing whatever ball. And he's just waiting for him to do something. So, oh, you spilt something on the floor, so you wiped it up. Technically, that's washing the floor. That's work. You're gone. Right? Or, hey, your mom was cold, so you wrapped her in a blanket. Technically, that's work. You're gone. You're done. And these are silly examples, right? We laugh at them. But I highlight them to you to help you realize that in the minds of the Pharisees, in the very legalistic mind of the observant Jews of the day, God was far less loving, merciful, caring, someone who gave this ordinance of the Sabbath day out of love and care for his people. It was much more someone who was just waiting for you to mess up. Just waiting for you to do something wrong so he could just write you off. We find that this same mentality comes into our minds far more than we maybe like to admit. We find that this idea that, oh, God's just waiting for me to mess up. What hope do I have? Or, I've messed up so many times in the past. How could God keep wanting to work with me? Or how could God keep wanting to work with that guy? Boy, they're a mess. We find that often we get so caught up in the do's and do nots, the things which maybe started out as being good, started out as being beneficial to us. We get so caught up in the do's and do nots that we forget the love and the grace of God when He told us these things. We forget that God, in knowing what He was working with, still decided to work with us. That God put us in the place and the time that we are, knowing full well our past. Knowing full well how we will stumble in the future. God put the Sabbath in place as a means of reminding the people of their relationship with Him. The covenant that He had made with them to be their God, to make them His people. And they got so far removed from that relationship that they just started getting up in arms over doing anything that even might think it's work. And so we go to John chapter 5. And we find this man that was just healed, that went from a place that was outside of the city, right, the Pool of Bethesda, just right outside the city, into the temple carrying his bed. Was so abhorrent to them, to their way of thinking, that they demanded, "Who told you you could do this? Who told you that this was okay?" They didn't care that this man had just walked for the first time in 38 years. They didn't care that this man was in the temple worshiping God. They cared that God said, "You don't work on the Sabbath day." And they saw carrying the mat as work. And so everything that came along with it was worthy of death in their minds. How often do we confuse our own expectations of God and what He desires? How often do we confuse that with just our own boundaries that we put on ourselves? How often do we confuse the sin that we're surrounded with in the world as something that needs to be avoided when it could be witnessing opportunities? When it could be opportunities to see someone not who's entrenched and ruining their lives with things that we would never think of doing in 1,000 years. Right? Someone who needs Jesus. Someone who needs to have an experience with Jesus. I remind you last week as we spoke about this man, he was one of maybe even a couple of thousand that were sitting by that pool. One man that had an experience with Christ. And Jesus said, "Take up your bed and walk." Now Christ could have healed everybody that was sitting there by that pool that day. He could have chosen anybody else on the face of the earth to pastor Banner Missionary Baptist Church. He could have chosen anybody else to sit in your seat. He could have chosen anybody else to send His word, to send His Son to. But you've had that experience. You're sitting in that seat. Believe it or not, God chose you. What do we do with that? There are a lot of people who will try and tell us what way we should believe, how we should conduct ourselves in accordance with God's Word. There are a lot of very legalistic religions out there that convolute what God has done and what God desires from mankind with tradition, with law. Do we understand the simplicity of what God has given us in a way that we can articulate it to others? There's a whole host of people who don't understand a simple relationship between themselves and Jesus. They want to bring a whole bunch of other stuff into it. Our job is to remind them, no. Just like Jesus chose this man here at the pool of Bethesda. He saw this man who had a need and He healed him directly. Forget what the Jews thought about the Sabbath. Forget everything that was attached to it. He just healed him. Jesus can just heal you. Jesus can just heal that family member. He can just speak to their hearts in a way that you'll never be able to. We have to remember that sometimes we're really good at just overcomplicating things. But in finding Christ and finding the mercy of God, we have to remember that sometimes it's just as simple as take up your bed and walk. There's more that we could get into. I certainly intended on getting into that much more today, but I think that's sufficient for the morning. As we bear this word, as we bear this gospel to others, as we bear it ourselves, remembering what God is to us in our own lives, let's remember that God knows what He's working. And just like He knows your heart, He knows the heart of the person that you're trying to talk to or that you're praying for. And He chooses to deal with them. He chooses to deal with them through you sometimes. And as inadequate as we might feel to be a witness to these people, as inadequate as we might feel to bring the word of the Lord to the people who need to hear it most, God chose you to do that. So let's do it. That's all I have for you this morning.